Thank you very much for that. And now we're moving on to the public hearing with item 27899, the long-term loan of the Thomas Jefferson statue by Pierre Jean David from City Hall to the New York Historical Society. Per standard procedure.
Signe, I'm sorry. I just wanted to let anyone know, if you're in the meeting and you want to testify, please do be sure that you have signed up, because that way I will know to call on you. There's a sign-in form for giving testimony on the agenda, and it's also, if you're watching on YouTube, it's in the description below the YouTube video.
Great, thank you, Carrie.
Thank you.
Per standard procedures, the applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and we will vote. So please feel free to present.
So we have, I believe, Danique Miller is going to introduce the project.
Yeah, good afternoon. I know that my colleague, Councilmember Inez Barron, is on.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I would certainly like for her to start us off here. And if it's okay, my testimony will follow hers.
Oh, okay. I thought you were introducing. Is anyone introducing this project, or are we just going to go straight into hearing from the New York?
No, just straight into the testimony. And the testimony will include some of the history as well.
Okay. But I do just want to make sure everyone knows what we're, I know that we have the presentation here, and what we're reviewing is a request to loan the plaster model of Thomas Jefferson that is in the City Council chamber to the New York Historical Society. So Inez Barron, you wanted to start? Can we unmute? Okay, there you are. You can start now.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Glad to be here, and glad that we are finally at the point where we will reach a decision about the removal of the Thomas Jefferson statue from the chambers of City Hall, where legislative matters are debated and where discussion takes place as to what are the best movements, the best legislation that would enrich the lives of the people who are living here in New York City. So this is a topic which was introduced, the movement that started about 20 years ago, when my husband, Assemblymember Charles Barron, who was then the council member, thought it was an outrage. And he'll speak for himself. When I'm finished, he'll speak for himself, that we should have in the chambers of the New York City Council a statue of Thomas Jefferson in a position of honor and recognition and tribute. So some 20 years ago, the issue was raised, and the present Black, Latino, and Asian caucus continued that concern and continued that fight to this present day to have the removal of the statue. We sent a letter to the speaker in, I think, 2019, talking about the inappropriateness of the statue. And the letter then was forwarded to the mayor to again address the issue of the inappropriateness of having this statue of a person who felt that Blacks were inferior to whites, in his own words, having a place of significance in the chambers. So we know that during the period of enslavement, Africans were kidnapped from their homeland. They were separated from their families, and they were bound and chained and forced to walk long distances. Then they were subjected to the atrocities of the Ma'afa, the Middle Passage, where oftentimes they were restricted and confined to a space of only 18 inches headroom. They were exploited of their skills. They were held as chattel, meaning they were not considered human. They were worked from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, the expression cant to cant. There was no compensation for the work and the skills and their labor. And in fact, those who had plantations and forced breeding amongst those that they had enslaved, those persons were in fact in a type of, what would be called today a pimp, putting out the sexual demands on persons whom they had enslaved, so that their numbers of enslaved people on their plantations could be expanded and that their profit would be increased. So we know also that although Thomas Jefferson is considered one of the, quote, founding fathers, it was Thomas Jefferson who also described the Native Americans, in his own words, as savages. And it was actually under Thomas Jefferson that the so-called Indian removal plan was implemented, a plan that resulted in ethnic cleansing and genocidal displacement under the efforts and the guise and the title of westward expansion. Thomas Jefferson, when asked about freeing those who had been enslaved, said that it would be like abandoning children who wouldn't be able to understand and take care of those rights that he wanted to so proudly give to white men: life, liberty, and happiness. We say that these are not characteristics of someone who should be elevated, that these are not the kinds of precepts that this nation, which was built on in terms of 3/5 clause that says Blacks would be entitled to 3/5 of the number for the representation, and posits that we are in fact subhuman by their standards. So we're not being revisionist. We're not waging a war on history. We're saying that we want to make sure that the total story is told, that there are no half-truths, and that we are not perpetrating lies. And as we get these informational pieces that are brought to us, we want to make sure that we don't engage in throwing them away or not embracing their truthfulness, and that we don't engage in a method or a status of cognitive dissonance. So pass it to Assembly Member.
Well, I think the Councilwoman said it well, and I'll be as blunt as she was. He was a slave-holding pedophile that should not be honored with a statue. He should be written in the history books, not transferred to the Historical Society. They should not even accept this. He should be in the history books with his complete history written. He raped Sally Hemings, a teenage enslaved African under him who bore his children. Thomas Jefferson and so many others, the first 13 to 15 presidents of the United States of America, were slaveholders. And some have the nerve to say, well, that's what they did at that time. Really? Well, I can think of a lot of things that were done in the history of Europeans in Germany and in some other places, and no one would palm it off and say, well, that's just what they did at that time, a Holocaust or something like that. They would never do that. And every other ethnic group, they have people who raped them, they have people who murdered them, they have people who enslaved them, from the Irish to so many others. So no one would honor people who did those kinds of vile things to them in history with a statue. It's bad enough we have to walk through this city and look at street names like Jefferson and Washington, who sold us for molasses, and look at street names in my beloved East New York, like Skank Avenue, one of the biggest slaveholders in Brooklyn, and Van Sicklin, a slaveholder. These are insults to our people. These are not statues that should be erected. They should be in history, I agree with that, and tell the whole story. We started this battle 20 years ago. And the only reason why they're coming up with it now is because people are looking at deeper systemic problems in this system and calling for radical systemic change. So now they'll give us a statue removal, and should, And now the governor will give us Juneteenth as a holiday. Half of us didn't even ask him for it. We asked for reparations, which is another argument that this city and state should take on. We passed a bill in the assembly. So when we remove this statue, we are making a step in the right direction for erasing, honoring those who murdered and raped us. And when you think of him being one of the architects of the Constitution that called us 3/5 of human beings, him talking about the Declaration of Independence that called indigenous people savages and that separated themselves from England because England was abolishing slavery and the colonists didn't want to. And this enslavement is affecting us to this day. It still has psychological and economic damages in our communities to this very day, which is why we call for reparations. So not only should this statue should be removed, it should be destroyed and not erected anywhere else. Long overdue. Do the right thing.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but is Councilmember Adams here? I'll try to unmute them. I believe. Okay, Councilmember Adams, if you'd like to say something, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you very much. And thank you to my colleagues, particularly Assemblymember Barron and my colleague, Councilmember Barron. Thank you for your your history on this. I am Councilmember Adrienne Adams. Thank you, members of the commission as well. I represent District 28 in the City Council. I want to thank you for having this public hearing today. When I first walked into the City Council chambers nearly 4 years ago as a sitting elected official, I immediately noticed the statue of Thomas Jefferson. It was, and still is, one of the most prominent figures in the entire room, no matter where you're sitting or standing. Everyone, from City Council members to staff, to speakers, and the general public, inevitably see the statue upon entering the chamber. And that's the way it's been since 1915, when the statue was first installed in the City Council chambers by way of the rotunda of City Hall, and before then the governor's room, where it first arrived in 1834. Thomas Jefferson is one of our country's most notable founding fathers, the third president of the United States and the primary author of the Declaration of Independence. It's thanks to Thomas Jefferson that we hold dear certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our country has celebrated his contributions and legacy through countless tributes, monuments, and yes, even statues. Many of our schools, roads, and other public institutions across these United States, as the Assembly member said, bear his name. Yet, as a lawmaker, and perhaps more importantly, as an African-American woman, I cannot help but think about the other part of his legacy, not talked about enough, whether in the confines of our halls at City Hall, in our classrooms, or in our communities. Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder who owned over 600 human beings, African slaves, that he reaped the economic benefits of slave labor from. He maintained the notion that Black people were inferior to white people, and even compared, as the Assembly member said, he even compared the very idea of freeing slaves from their captivity to abandoning children. Notably, Jefferson fathered 6 children with Sally Hemings, his slave, who was also his wife's half-sister. Jefferson was 44 years old. Hemings was just 14 at the time of what is believed to be their first sexual encounter, while he served as the United States Minister to France. Jefferson embodied some of the most shameful parts of our country's long and nuanced history. Now, when I walk into City Council chambers to vote, discuss legislative matters, facilitate oversight hearings, and conduct the business of the people, this is the history that I'm thinking about, as well as the history that I was taught as a child regarding our founding fathers. It makes me deeply uncomfortable knowing that we sit in the presence of a statue that pays homage to a slaveholder who fundamentally believed that people who looked like me were inherently inferior, lacked intelligence, and were not worthy of freedom or rights, the same rights that he eminently described in the Declaration of Independence. That's why, as the council member for the 28th District and co-chair of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus of the council, I joined the call for the statue's removal in 2019, in 2020, and even today. As city council members of color, we deserve dignity and respect. We deserve monuments that inspire us to fight for equality, fairness, and justice for all New Yorkers. Though the statue of Thomas Jefferson has been located inside the chambers for close to 2 centuries, I believe it's time for us as a city to turn the page and move forward. We now have the opportunity to do that by relocating the statue to the New York Historical Society, where the full story of Thomas Jefferson will be told in context. We can no longer cherry pick the parts of history that make us feel comfortable while ignoring the ugly parts of history that make us uncomfortable. We need to understand and confront the whole picture, and that includes the legacy of Thomas Jefferson. I urge every member of the Public Design Commission to vote yes to the City Council's proposal. Thank you so much for allowing me to give these remarks. Thank you once again to my colleagues in government. We all look forward to finally seeing the statue's removal from our City Council chambers. Thank you very much.
Margie, are you available? Can you just, there she is. I'd like to just walk through the proposal and hear from the New York Historical Society.
And Margie, I can advance the slides for you, so just say next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carrie, and thank you very much, Council Members Barron and Adams. I'm going to start by just reviewing some of the basic details of the statue and then go into why the New York Historical Society is a suitable place to care for and interpret the statue. Grace, do you want to advance? I think we all know it's currently located in City Hall. Next slide. In the City Council chamber. Next slide. And you'll see it at the very left of the room. It stands on a very tall pedestal, and at more than 7 feet tall, it does tower over the City Council chamber. Next slide. Basic details. Next slide. The statue was given to the city by Uriah Phillips Levy, the first Jewish Commodore of the US Navy and prominent citizen of New York. Next slide. Levy was inspired to commission the statue because he was he admired Thomas Jefferson, and particularly Jefferson's advocacy for religious freedom. He took it upon himself to commission Pierre-Jean David d'Angers, prominent sculptor in France, to create the statue. And the original bronze was erected in Washington in front of the White House in the 1830s. Next slide. That bronze statue sat on the White House lawn, on the North Lawn, from the 1830s through the 1870s, and then it moved to the Capitol Rotunda, where it still stands today. Next slide. The plaster model, which is the statue in the City Council chamber, is the one that Levy donated to the citizens of New York in 1833. And we've already heard that it has been in 3 separate locations in City Hall, originally the governor's room, then the rotunda, and finally the City Council chamber in 1915. Next. The statue has been well cared for and was restored in 2010 and 11. And at that time, it was noted that it is subject to damage due to the proximity of people working around it, and at that time, a higher pedestal was installed. Next slide. So the New York Historical Society was contacted about the statue, and we have agreed to provide a temporary home for it. Next slide. If approved, we would engage the firm Marshall Fine Arts to crate and transport the statue to Marshall Fine Arts facility on Long Island before it comes to the New York Historical Society. So I wanted to also provide a little background as to why we think the Historical Society is a proper temporary home for the statue. I imagine most of you are familiar with the New York Historical Society. We are the city's oldest museum, founded in 1804. Our building is located on Central Park West and 77th Street, just south of the Natural History Museum. We are the city's American History Museum, a place not only to learn about the past, but to discuss and debate the making and meaning of history. New York Historical presents about 20 changing exhibitions every year that delve into historical and art historical topics, ranging from slavery and women's rights to the Hudson River School and Audubon's Birds of America. We offer a robust education program that serves approximately 200,000 students and teachers each year at our museum, in the city's public schools, and online. In addition, we present lecture series and panel discussions by distinguished historians and public figures that explore the past, current events, and pressing issues of our times. New York Historical has the professional expertise to provide the physical care that this fragile historic artifact requires. Our museum staff includes conservators and registrars who will monitor its condition, oversee its transport and installation, and make sure that it is stored and displayed under proper climate and security conditions. Equally important is the scholarly expertise we can bring to the statue. Our board of trustees includes American history scholars who have delved into Jefferson's life and legacy, most notably Harvard professor and Jefferson scholar Annette Gordon-Reed. If the loan is approved, we would plan a display of the Jefferson statue in a prominent location on our first floor with interpretation that provides historical context and explores Jefferson's complicated legacy, his contributions as a founding father and draftsman of the Declaration of Independence, and the contradictions between his vision of human equality and his ownership of enslaved people. We would also highlight the story of the statue's donor, Uriah Levy, and his admiration of Jefferson's advocacy for religious freedoms. What New York Historical can offer that City Hall cannot is public access to the sculpture and the opportunity to share its history with thousands of New Yorkers, including the many students who come through our doors. We would use the statue to invite discussion around a very difficult topic in American history. And Louise Mera and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Hi, I think I saw, sorry, I saw a hand raised by, I thought it was Councilmember Miller. Are you, did you want to say something? Okay, sorry, I thought you were done.
Yes, I did. I was actually not conceding my testimonial.
Okay.
I was just merely stating that my colleagues should open, considering that they had been working on this issue for a long period of time. But good afternoon. I'm Councilmember Nick Miller, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important subject. I'm also the chair. I represent the 27th Council District here in Southeast Queens, and I'm the co-chair of the Council's Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus. I want to thank, to start off by saying, quite frankly, this is simply not a debate about removal of Thomas Jefferson statue from the council chambers. That is not a debate. We are not debating the merits of a historic figure with some human flaws. We are in fact talking about an individual who owes his livelihood to the sale and exploitations of human beings. Jefferson directly profited and wrote in support of monetization of slaves. For him, they were valuable capital assets. He used slaves as collateral for a major loan he took out in 1796 from a Dutch bank housing so that he could rebuild Monticello, his primary plantation. In a 1792 letter to George Washington, Jefferson noted an accounting discovery. He was making a 4% profit each year on the birth of a Black child. In another communication, he noted that slaves presented an investment strategy for their future. He wrote to an acquaintance who had suffered financial losses that he would have been better off investing in Negroes. He advised the acquaintances that if his family had any cash left, that they should invest in slaves because they bring a silent profit of 5 to 10% in this country by increase in their value. Jefferson noted that it was not even the labor of the slaves that was most valuable to him, but their increase in numbers. He once wrote, "A child raised every 2 years is of more profit than the crop of the best laboring of men." He even wrote to one of his plantation managers with respect, "Therefore, to our women and children, I must pray you upon the overseers that it is not their labor, but their increase, which is the first consideration to me." He himself fathered 6 children with Sally Hemings, a relationship that began when she was underage and that she could not inherently have given her full consent to as an enslaved woman. They were not in love, as some might try to have you believe. Jefferson believed that white Americans and enslaved Blacks constituted 2 separate nations who could not live peacefully together in the same country. He believed that to be racially inferior, Blacks to be racially inferior and incapable, and quite frankly, they act as children. He argued that if emancipation were to occur, that Blacks must be deported back to Africa or somewhere in the West Indies. Clearly, this man, who considered himself an authority on keeping of slaves, it is wrong to conflate his owning slaves simply as a consequence of the time that he lived in. His writings and his treatment of slaves in Monticello depict his fundamental belief that Blacks were inferior to whites and that they deserved to be treated in such a way. For all these reasons, I find baffling that there are those in favor of keeping this statue in the council chambers. Even as the majority minority members of this legislative body have likened his domineering presence to psychological warfare, being constantly reminded of the atrocities of slavery, also the atrocities perpetrated on indigenous folks and his long-term impact on social economic suppression of those people have even today. To be clear, we are not seeking to erase history with the removal of this statue, but we are saying unequivocally, we will not celebrate and uplift and lift up a man whose success was built on the backs of slaves in this council chambers. A few years ago, when the students from PS 136 in my district in Queens were visiting City Hall, and they took a tour on their field trip, a 4th grader remarked on Thomas Jefferson's statue and asked, why was he being heralded in the council chambers when he was such a prolific slave owner? Our youth expect better from this legislative body, and we owe it to them to replace his statue with a more appropriate historical figure. As the nation comes to grip with its past, and we raise up and educate our youth on the real history of America, we are simultaneously undertaking a duty to elevate role models and celebrate those who contributed to the lives and experience of all individuals in a positive way in this country. Let us not forget that when Jefferson wrote that all men were created equally, it applied only to white males. It has been over a century since Jefferson's statue was installed in council chambers. Surely we can all agree that the importance of this statue, monument, and other symbols in public life means something, especially to those whose struggle and triumphs have been downplayed and marginalized. In many cases, erased and improperly, their history has been told. To continue to elevate this man and overlook the contributions of countless others whose lives and service truly demonstrate the principles and equity that we aspire would be a travesty and a perpetuation of privilege that only serves to uphold the ideals of white supremacy. I thank the commission for affording me the opportunity, and I look forward to its immediate removal. I look forward to the passage of this this afternoon. So thank you for hearing us out.
So we have some people signed up to testify. The first person will be Todd Fine. I just asked you to unmute, Todd. Okay,
Yes,
please go ahead.
hello. My
And
name
just
is
as a-
Todd
I'm sorry.
Fine. I'm the president of the Washington Street Advocacy Group, which advocates for public art in the city. Can you hear me? Yes. I'll turn off my video. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes?
I could hear you say yes.
You can hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello? Yes, okay. Yes. So, yes, I'm Todd Fine. I'm the president of the Washington Street Advocacy Group, which advocates for public art in the city. And I am bewildered that there is no explanation from any city agency explaining why the statue could not be moved in another case in City Hall. The testimony from the council members was only about, for the most part, about the council chambers. It could easily be moved to the governor's room, which is filled with people associated with slavery. I mean, unfortunately or unfortunately not. So the implication of this decision to send it to the Historical Society, a private entity, might mean that you would have to, in the future, remove many, many important public artworks from the governor's room. And that should be dealt with. A number of scholars of Jefferson, a collection of leading scholars, sent a letter to the Design Commission proposing that alternative, and that should be considered. There should be full explanation of why that alternative was not considered. I would like to read a statement from Sean Wilentz, who is the George Henry Davis 1886 professor of American history at Princeton University, who wants the statue to remain in City Hall, as I should want to add also, as does Annette Gordon Reed, the expert on Sally Hemings, who was mentioned several times in testimony. But here is Sean Wilentz. Removal of the David DeAnger statue of Thomas Jefferson from City Hall would be a direct attack on the symbol of the democratic values New Yorkers hold dear. The statue specifically honors Jefferson for his greatest contribution to America, indeed to humankind. The basic idea, radical then, radical now, that all men are created equal. The idea that animates the Declaration of Independence and that connotes religious freedom. Nothing like it had ever been stated or even imagined before as the basis for a political order without kings or hereditary aristocrats or theocrats. It is an idea so capacious and audacious that it outstripped the realities of Jefferson's time, nourishing abolitionists, women's rights advocates, and every other variety of human rights champions down to our own time. There are those who said while he lived that Jefferson the slaveholder could not have really meant what he wrote, that some people really were created more equal than others. But never in public or in private did Jefferson back off from or seek to amend or modify his finest contribution. There is no honoring Jefferson without reservation, but there is no dishonor in that with respect to slavery and racial justice as with every other struggle for equality. By removing his statue, we would forget how America's racist pro-slavery leaders came to repudiate Jefferson's declaration as a collection of self-evident lies, standing rebukes to their barbaric cause. Nor can we forget that Jefferson's enduring words and actions set the very standard by which we find him wanting, the standard to which Dr. King appealed when he quoted Jefferson on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Lincoln, meanwhile, warned that those who would forsake Jefferson were, quote, the vanguard, the miners and sappers of returning despotism, unquote. To disown Jefferson now, with despotism on the rise in our country as never before in our lifetimes, would be a symbolic blow, especially to the most vulnerable among us, for whom Jefferson's cry of equality remains the last best hope. Thank you. And I would just finally like to say that this should not go to a private entity. That is against the principles of the Public Design Commission. Thank you.
Okay, the next person is Bhagirati Savage.
Hi, good afternoon.
Go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, fine. I just wanted to say that Jefferson was born into a situation of slavery that existed for thousands of years. He was opposed to the institution his entire life, and he took several steps to abolish it. As a young lawyer, he took the case of 6 slaves suing for their freedom. In 1769, he proposed a law to allow manumission by deed or will to the House of Burgesses. They were hooted out of the assembly, and his colleague was called a traitor. In 1774, he instructed the Virginia delegates to bring up the issue of slavery at the Continental Congress. And he said that the abolition of domestic slavery is the great object of desire in those colonies where it was unhappily introduced in their infant state. He wrote in both his second and third drafts of the Constitution for Virginia, he wrote, "No person hereafter coming into this country shall be held in slavery under any pretext whatever." Next came the Declaration of Independence. Of course, he wrote, "All men are created equal." He meant all men are created equal. He included 2 paragraphs that were deleted, and in there he used uppercase MEN, referring to slaves. Jefferson didn't even start his sentences with uppercase letters. So he was saying these were people, these were men. And he was condemning the British for forcing that institution on the colonies. Those 5 words have changed the world. Within 100 years of thousands of years of slavery, it ended in America. Abraham Lincoln recognized this. He said, "I am sustained by Jefferson." And he said, "All honor to Jefferson, to the man who, in the concrete pressure of a struggle for national independence by a single people, had the coolness, forecast, and capacity to introduce into a merely revolutionary document an abstract truth applicable to all men and all times." After that, Jefferson wrote a law that ended the slave trade in Virginia. It passed in 1778. And he said of that law, "This will in some measure stop the increase of this great political and moral evil, while the minds of our citizens may be ripening for a complete emancipation of human nature." Jefferson also wrote a bill calling for the gradual emancipation of the slaves. It was held aside as an amendment when it was considered in 1785. And when he found out that it didn't pass, he wrote this. He said, referring to the slaves, he said, "When the measure of their tears shall be full, when their tears shall have involved heaven itself in darkness, doubtless a God of justice will awaken to their distress." When considering slavery in the Western territories, Jefferson was quite plain in his 1783 draft ordinance that after the year 1800, there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in any of the newly admitted states. It failed by 1 vote, and he wrote, "The voice of a single individual would have prevented this abominable crime from spreading itself over the new country. Thus we see the fate of unborn millions hanging on the tongue of one man, and heaven was silent in that awful moment."
Okay, you've reached the end of your time. Are you done? Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I believe some other people have gone longer than 3 minutes, but
No, well, they were actually presenting their proposal. I know it's a little bit of a possibly different format as we usually do.
Considering the whole story, you should know the whole story.
Thank you. The next person on our list is Rachel Klingberg, but I do not see her, Rachel, in the meeting. So we're going to go to Natabara Lawson.
Yes.
Go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah. And can I share my screen? Is that okay?
No, we don't usually do that. You can, you're welcome to send us something.
Okay, yeah, I will. Well, let me just go over one thing because I hear this repeated. There's a real misconception in the scientific community when the 1998 study came out ascribing this DNA match with Sally Hemings' descendant, Eston Hemings, or son, Eston Hemings. When that was first announced, the scientific community really condemned that initial statement and that assessment. And they came forward saying it was misleading, it was not a misstatement of fact, it was an abuse of the scientific press. Now, this all played out in the scientific journal world where most people don't read these things, but it forced the author of that study, and I'm bringing this up because this speaks to a general misconception. There's a lot of people mentioning certain things about Jefferson's pedophilia and that kind of thing. And I think we need to take a step back and look at the science, because the author of that study wrote in the New York Times on an op-ed on November 6, 1998, the genetic findings my collaborators and I reported in the scientific journal Nature do not prove that Thomas Jefferson was the father of one of Sally Hemings' children. We never made that claim. Now, the scientific community attacked his article, saying that the authors did not consider all the data at hand in interpreting the results. Foster omitted any presentation of a number of adult Jefferson males. No mention was made of Thomas Jefferson's brother Randolph or his 5 sons, and that evidence suggests no specific Jefferson. Now, the Scientific Journal in America came forward just after that and said, contrary to headlines that splashed across the country in November, there is no conclusive proof that former US President Thomas Jefferson fathered an illegitimate child by his slave Sally Hemings. At least 5 of his family members are candidates for paternity of Sally's child, researchers admit in their letter in tomorrow's issue of Nature, where that article author said, it is true that men of Randolph Jefferson's family could have fathered Sally Hemings' later children. Space constraints prevented us from expanding on alternative interpretations. The title assigned to our study was misleading. We know that from the historical DNA data that Thomas Jefferson can neither be definitively excluded nor solely implicated in the paternity of illegitimate children with his slave Sally Hemings. Now, another journal came forward and said it was an abuse of the scientific press. And more recently, in 2011, Dr. Stephen Quake at Stanford University said, all that the DNA indicated in the end was that descendants of Jefferson's paternal uncle have the same Y chromosome as a male line descendant of Eston Hemings, the youngest of Sally Hemings' sons. The research could never finger Jefferson individually with complete accuracy. So my point is that there's a lot of misconceptions about this DNA research that supposedly definitively stated that Jefferson fathered these children, when in actuality, in the scientific community at least, that is nowhere near proven. So it illustrates a general point that, I will finish now, that there's a lot of misconceptions and we need to take a big step back on a lot of these assumptions about Jefferson that are driving this discussion right now. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Jacob Morris.
You okay?
Go ahead.
Am I?
We can hear you.
Yeah, and am I also visual?
No, we only see your name.
Oh, gee. Well, how do I start my video? Oh, okay. Hey, there I am. Okay. So I want to say that if you're not welcome somewhere, then you should go. So, my first critique of this is jurisdictional. I really see the city council as being incredibly expedient in foisting this on Public Design Commission. I don't think anybody has a question about that the city council has the power and the jurisdiction to vote up or down where they want the statue. They do have the power and they do have the jurisdiction to expediently send it to the Public Design Commission for the wonderful commissioners, who, by the way, do not have a historian as a member, to make a decision for them is really disappointing. At best, it's disappointing. The commission should unequivocally say, you know what? We're going to send it back to you because you guys have the power. You guys have the jurisdiction to make your own decisions about where you want Jefferson's statue. And so you should remand it back to the city council for them to have a hearing and take a vote. And if there's a majority of the council members, and there probably will be, that want to move the statue out of the council chambers to wherever they want to move it to, then let them vote out in the open and not foisted on my wonderful public design commissioners. Now, let me go a little further. They're attacking Jefferson because his statue's there. Okay, you know what? He's an easy target because he's right there in their chambers. But what about Christopher Columbus? What about Boss Tweed? What about Richard Riker? Now you're talking about really unequivocally horrible people. Christopher Columbus, the man who introduced chattel slavery to the Western Hemisphere, and he got these huge statues all around the city, not to speak of Columbus Circle. Do something about him, city council. And what about Boss Tweed, the most corrupt public official in our city's history, and his name's on the Tweed Courthouse, which happens to be the headquarters of our public school system? Does somebody want to tell me that Jefferson is worse than Boss Tweed? No, he's not. Boss Tweed is much worse than Thomas Jefferson. And so is Christopher Columbus. He introduced slavery to the Western Hemisphere. Jesus Christ, and brutalized the original Americans to dig for gold and other riches from his greed and his arrogance. And not for nothing, Richard Riker, the chief magistrate in New York City for almost 20 years in the 1820s and the 1830s, got kickbacks from bounty hunting rings for the kidnapping of the children of free Black families and issued certificates of removal under the Fugitive Slave Act. The patriarch of the Riker family that owned Rikers Island, otherwise known as Injustice Island. How about getting his name off of that island? How about getting Boss Tweed's name off of the headquarters of our public school system?
Fine.
And please remand this to the city council. Let them stand up and get their priorities together. And they want to do it, then do the other guys too. Thank you.
So do I have Lucian Truscott here? I believe if you're muted, if you're calling in and you're muted, I believe it's *9 to unmute yourself, right? Is that correct? I am trying to unmute Lucian.
He just requested.
Yeah. I think that Lucian, if you can hear, I think you have to click, is it *9, Jenna? Yes, okay. If you can click *9 on your phone, it will unmute you. Okay, we'll come back to Lucian. Sorry about that. The next person is Edward Borninski. I do not see. Okay, then we'll go to Robert Loscalzo.
Am I unmuted?
You are. Go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you. I am Robert Loscalzo, and I oppose the removal of the Thomas Jefferson statue from the City Council chamber, specifically to become a long-term loan to the New York Historical Society. The specific subject of your upcoming vote on this matter is the written application that was submitted by DCAS, not the council. I encourage each of you to review it. The application itself provides no rationale for removing the statue from the public space where it has stood for 106 years, or any reason for you to conclude that it would be a net benefit to the public to do so. EDC has published a presentation about this matter. Unlike the application, the presentation mentions 2 alleged justifications for the proposed loan of the statue. However, each of them is contradicted by facts. The first alleged justification to remove the statue is to protect the artwork. However, 10 years ago, the statue was already given a new higher pedestal plus a metal guardrail. The statue's base is now elevated roughly 5 feet above floor level, making it very unlikely that anyone will impact the statue. Moreover, the City Council chamber is among the most protected public spaces in the city, with a sergeant at arms and his staff dedicated to protect all the property in the room. To claim that the statue needs to be removed from there in order to protect it is ridiculous. And if protecting the statue is so important, one of the most dangerous things you can do is to take it down, lean it on its side, hoist it onto a crane, transport it out of City Hall and through potholed city streets to the Upper West Side, all unnecessarily. The second alleged justification to loan the statue to the Historical Society is that it provides opportunities to exhibit it within an educational and historical context. However, the Historical Society has no current plan to exhibit the statue. Here's their statement last week. While there are no specific plans for display at the moment, New York Historical might in future years present an exhibition that may include it. Note the qualifying language. They might present an exhibition that may include the statue, or then again, they may not. Approving a loan of the statue to the Historical Society, which is not committed to ever display the statue, will effectively take what is now public artwork and conceal it from public access for the foreseeable future. That is contrary to the public interest. Moreover, the Historical Society is a private entity, which charges the public an adult admission fee of $22. If the Historical Society ever does exhibit this public artwork, we will be paying to see it. Perhaps because such arrangements are not in the public interest, the gift and loan provision of the New York State Constitution prohibits the loan of city property to a private entity. For the foregoing reasons, I urge you to deny the current application of DCAS. And I would also like to just add that even Charles Barron agrees that the statue should not be going to the Historical Society. And to the extent there are 2 components here, the desire to remove it from City Council chamber, and then the second part of it is, where's it going to go? Even Charles Barron today said he does not agree that it should go to the Historical Society. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Still do not have Lucian unmuted. Lucian, I think you have to hit *9 again. We will, let's see, who's next?
Carrie,
Yes.
It might be *6.
Oh, really?
For Lucian. Yeah. I think
Is it
*9
*6?
is giving the raise hand.
Ah. Okay. Sorry, folks. I'm going to try to see if we have anybody else here. Okay. I think, what about John Crutcher? No. Okay, we did have John. And how about, okay, we'll go to Raymond Lavertu. Go ahead, Raymond.
Unmute. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. I'm from overseas, but I'm also a New Yorker. I am a research fellow at the Royal American Institute at the University of Oxford. But I'm here in sort of as a citizen of New York City and a voter. And I formerly taught at the City University of New York, and including City College, Brooklyn College, and Bronx Community College. And I should say history. So I'm here in that personal sort of capacity. And I've been listening to everyone, and everything makes sense to me, everything that's been said. And at the same time, it's a struggle to try and think of what is really the best thing. And I think without question, and this is me just sort of being personally trying to work this out, not jurisdictionally, but I guess you could say philosophically. And I think Jefferson should definitely be removed from the city council chambers. That's without question. But I think he should stay in the seat of government in a public space. So maybe this is a bit jurisdictional. And I think everyone knows that he's not being honored as a man, as a saint, but for two ideas, the Declaration of Independence, the idea of equality did start something. It was new. It was a human idea conceived by a human being, flawed, massively flawed. But I think we need to remember that it's a human who thought of that based on things he'd learned. He was a product of the Enlightenment, which has also sort of become very, a very unpopular concept. But again, it was real. So I think Jefferson needs to be grappled with daily. And I know that's difficult. And I heard everyone speak very eloquently, and I do understand, but his ideas need to be remembered daily in a public space of government. The United States has more challenges than ever, and I think it needs to demonstrate that it can arrive at complex solutions to troubling human problems. And I know that New York City is capable of complex solutions. And people are watching there's internal challenges and there's also external challenges that will have to be dealt with. And I think Jefferson can remind people of very important things daily, every day. And I think one thing that I thought of was did I hear a bell? Maybe
yes.
Virginia statute.
Please wrap up.
I will wrap up. He wrote, and this I'll close on a quote: "Truth is great and will prevail if left to herself, that she is the proper and sufficient antagonist to error and has nothing to fear from the conflicts unless by human interposition, disarmed of her natural weapons, free argument and debate, errors ceasing to be dangerous when it is permitted freely to contradict them." So I think removal is a very simple solution that will erase that debate. We need to grapple with the human condition and human flaws to get him out of there, out of the council chambers, but put him somewhere in a public space, because his ideas are public property, and at least one statue should be as well. And that's probably all I'll say at the moment.
Okay, looks like Lucian Truscott is unmuted. If you want to go ahead, Lucian.
Yes, my name is Lucian Truscott. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. I was asked to speak today, I guess, because I'm a sixth great grandson of Jefferson. I'm the white Jefferson descendant who invited the descendants of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson to the family reunion some 20 years ago. And I'd like to say that the little presentation you got before about the DNA evidence was completely bogus. Nobody has ever asked me to present any DNA evidence to prove who I am. And I don't think that the Hemings descendants should have to present any DNA evidence either. They have strong oral history in their families and have had it for well over 100 years of who they are, and they know who they are. I know them. I've met 800 of my Sally Hemings cousins, and I can tell you affirmatively that they are descendants of Jefferson. But that's not what I want to talk about. I think it's a good idea to move the statue of Jefferson, and I'll tell you why. I was walking this morning into a deli out here on Long Island where I live, and a man with dark skin was on a little alley that I was in and passed me, and he looked away from me. He looked down at the ground. He didn't want to make eye contact. He acted as if he was afraid of me. And what it made me think about was what it must have been like for slaves owned by Thomas Jefferson to pass him on Mulberry Row or on the grounds of Monticello. I'd like you to take a moment to try to imagine what it would be like if you were one of the slaves passing this guy that owned you. I'm just a white guy and walking down into a deli on Long Island. I don't own anybody. But still, that guy with dark skin acted like he was afraid of me and didn't want to look in my direction. I think that you have to take into consideration what several other people have talked about, and that is what members of the public, especially those who are African American or brown, feel like when they walk into the city hall and into the chambers where Jefferson's statue is, and they're passing that man that owns slavery, that owns slaves. I think that it's not just about Thomas Jefferson. It's about the people of New York City, and the people of New York City that with their tax dollars own that building, that own City Hall. You have to take into consideration their feelings and what they feel like when they walk past this man that owned, during the time that he lived, over 600 human beings. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you. The next person we have on the list is Rosie Batista.
Hello.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi. So I oppose the removal of the statue of Jefferson. So his ideas are the reason that we are all able to meet freely in this room and express our states of mind today. And Jefferson was born into a system that enforced the morality and ethics of the rule at the time. So just like we were born into different times in history, depending on our age, where certain things were the norm, even if we didn't agree with them as we got older, that was the situation. So similar to today, there are state laws that we have to comply with or face coercive measures. So it's important to know what laws were present in 1692. So laws were in place in Virginia that placed an economic burden on any slave owner who released slaves, thus discouraging owners from freeing their slaves. And subsequent laws put prohibitive hardship on owners. And in 1723, a law forbid the emancipation of slaves under any circumstances, even by last will and testament. So Thomas Jefferson was born 20 years later in 1743, when these hostile laws were already in place. So as a member of the Virginia legislature in 1769, Jefferson made an effort in that body for permission of the emancipation of slaves, which was rejected. And obviously during the Crown government, nothing like that could have been successful. So following America's separation from Great Britain in 1776, individual states for the first time in American history were able to begin abolishing slavery. And this is a quote from Jefferson: "We are not in a world ungoverned by the laws and the power of a superior agent. Our efforts are in his hand and directed by it, and he will give them their effort in his own time. Where the disease is most deeply seated, there it will be slowest in eradication. And in northern states, it was merely superficial and easily corrected. In the southern, it is incorporated with the whole system and requires time, patience, and perseverance in the curative process." So it was Jefferson's writings that John Quincy Adams and Abraham Lincoln relied upon in their efforts to end slavery. So removing the statue might put out of sight, but it also removes the opportunity for a lively, healthy discussion, for the inspiration that the full story offers, and as an example of the human condition, that when we know better, we do better. And most importantly, that we learn from history so that we never repeat it. And again, because of Jefferson and the 55 other men who took up a quill pen in the hand and placed their names on a document, knowing that their lives were on the line, they did this for future generations and for every single one of us sitting here, because without that, none of us would have the freedom to be, again, in this room today, expressing our thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. So Signe, we did have quite a few other people signed up, but they are not in the meeting. So I think we can move forward with commissioner questions and comments.
Okay. Would someone like to, thank you, first of all, to all of you who spoke. It is obviously a topic of extraordinary passion and complexity. And I don't believe that we are going to be looking to debate history, but as one gentleman, I believe Mr. Losalzo said, we have indeed two issues here. One is to discuss the removal of the statue from the City Council chamber, and the other would be whether to relocate it to the New York Historical Society. So I think if we could focus on those topics, that would be our best course of action.
May I have a question, Signe?
The question, did you say?
Yeah, and also, if I may, okay?
Sure.
Okay, great. When the item was changed from the consent agenda to obviously a public hearing, which is where it always, of course, should have been, it was initially in writing presented as for the removal of the statue, and I think it seems to be the case today, that it went hand in hand with its removal from the City Council chamber and its acquisition, however temporary, by the New York Historical Society, who, as we heard today, will send it to its curator, and then it will remain there in safety and be taken care of, and perhaps will be exhibited at some time in the future in the New York Historical Society, which it has stated several times is a revered institution that is private and charges admission. It was only earlier today, I believe, I will stand corrected by my colleagues, that at least a possibility of further conversation and further perhaps research arose, and certainly a letter, at least from the 15 historians, which I think we all received this morning, raised some other questions and for time and the potential to perhaps, as others have said, maybe relocate it, remove it definitely from the city council chamber, and to possibly remove it to the governor's room at city council. So now it seems to me that we are now talking about, one, its removal, but at least at this point, two possibilities. That is, I mean, it seemed as if the New York Historical Society, that possibility was welcomed and maybe went hand in hand with some of the views at the city council. But it seems to me that these have now come to the fore and require, at least for me, a little more conversation and more than that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ethel. Would any other commissioners like to opine on this topic?
Signy, I mean, Ethel's point is, would it be possible today for us to vote for the removal of the statue from the city council chamber, where it's been eloquently pointed out it's not wanted or appreciated? I totally understand that. And either defer to our next meeting the decision as to where it will go, or if that's not feasible, to suggest that it be relocated at least temporarily within the city hall building in the governor's room. We are the custodians of the city's art collection. That's our primary and charter mandated purpose. And I think we probably have the authority to suggest its removal from the council chamber to the governor's room. And then we can make a decision with a little bit more discussion, as Ethel suggests, as to its long-term location.
Thank you, Phil.
Yes, I think that certainly would be a motion for us to consider. Are there other commissioners who would like to contribute their position?
I'd just like to clarify, if it does get moved temporarily, that we will still need to have it moved with the oversight of a conservation group. Would the city council be able to provide that oversight?
Susan, I think you broke up a bit. What did you say?
If it gets moved temporarily, then it would still need to be moved with the oversight of a conservation group. It's a difficult statute to move. Would the city council take care of providing that?
It definitely needs to be moved by a fine art transportation company. Is that what you mean? I mean, they
Yes.
had proposed Marshall Fine Arts, who's extremely
If
qualified.
it was moved temporarily, would that still be part of the proposal that we would be voting on?
Well, we could try to make it part of it.
Yeah.
The PDC can require that the artwork be moved by a fine art transportation company.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
This
Yes,
is
Deborah.
this is Meryl. I'm
yes,
sorry.
Meryl.
I've been coming in and out for the last hour, but I have had the privilege of listening to what I thought was an extraordinary body of public testimony. What it leads me to believe is that this is an issue that is not going to be simple to explicate, to excavate, or decide in the course of the time that we decided that this went on a public agenda, a consent agenda, and then was moved. I, for one, think that there is much more to understand about how this should play out. And I would like to see us table this motion so that we can further explore A, where it should go, B, how many times it should and can be moved, right? And perhaps most importantly, is to make sure that the public, and this is a public design commission, be given the chance to really understand the ramifications and the consequences of these consequential decisions. So I, for one, would like to say that Thomas Jefferson is and continues to be a flawed historical character, an important contributor in so many ways, a troubled human being in so many other ways. And I would like to see us have further consultation and discussion. So I would like to have a motion to perhaps table this until we can become more familiar with the arguments on both sides, and perhaps there'll be more than two sides. This is one of those things that could have 3 or 4 different contexts. Sorry for going on so long.
No, Meryl, thank you very much for that. Would any other commissioners care to speak up at this time?
I have a question for Councilmember Adams, or even any of the council members who came before us today with such passionate and compelling request. And I'm wondering, you in particular, Councilmember Adams, called for the removal of the statue and the creating of it and removal of it to the New York Historical Society. I wonder if you could speak to your perspective on what role such a figure, how such a figure should be interpreted in terms of what is Councilmember Barron brought up, that the total story must be told. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, the best way to do that as a way of informing the Public Design Commission's actions at this time.
Thank you so much for the opportunity once again. You know, as was said, you know, and I listened very intently to what everyone had to say, and, you know, while appreciating the thoughts of everyone's perspective, the bottom line is that there is no educational purpose for the statue to be in City Hall chambers. I think maybe we can at least come to that consensus. By placing the statue in the governor's room is just going to be moving it from one place in City Hall to another place in City Hall where we reside as council members, where we will know that statue, as many do, has been removed for the moment, or perhaps to placate the council for a moment. By moving it to the Historical Society, I believe, and my colleagues may have different feelings on this, but I believe that that is the place that it belongs, because it will have its full context and purpose there. It can be used for the educational purposes that perhaps some on this call have claimed that it's receiving in city council chambers, which it is not. It is a slaveholder looking down, in my opinion, which I've said in the past, looking down on people of color, who will be a majority council, by the way, come January, who will be looking down on people of color, where the work of the people is for the city of New York. So again, I respectfully believe that the place for it at this time, the removal space, should be the Historical Society, where the history is shown in full context and cannot be parceled out or cherry picked and deciding, you know, we just want to stay comfortable. I've had a testimony, a real comfortable testimony as far as Thomas Jefferson's role in history, and that's very nice. That is the history that I learned as a student in elementary school, by the way, but that was not the full story of Thomas Jefferson. And while we all appreciate the contributions of this founding father, we must also recognize the fact that he owned human and had an opportunity to do something about that. his relative, Mr. Scott, was very eloquent in the way that he felt about the situation as well. I don't want to ramble too much, so I'm going to stop. But I would have liked for everyone to have appreciated his testimony a lot more than it seems like it was appreciated and presented to this panel today. So I guess I'll leave it there. I believe that the place historically for a figure like this belongs in a historical museum. For me, the Historical Society is the appropriate place for that placement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Signe, I think we have a couple of members that have to leave soon. I know we're behind schedule.
All right, well then, as I see it, there are two motions on the table that, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is one motion which is to remove the statue from the City Council chamber as, quote, immediately, with its location to be more fully debated. And the other motion is that the entire topic requires more discourse, more public participation, and that the entire proposition should be tabled for a later date. Commissioners, am I stating those two options correctly?
I just wonder, in view of what the council member just said, is there, should we or can we within this have as an option the immediate removal and the sending to the New York Historical Society? Is that another proposition, or it does the first one leave it open enough that we then we are saying remove and then for more time to make the decisions?
That is the first option on the table. I mean, I do feel personally that the decision as to whether the statue should be, shall we say, remanded to the New York Historical Society does require further debate. I am sensitive to Councilmember Adams' statement that a place of where this can be more fully interpreted and history be understood with greater truth, quite honestly, is important. However, I will say I have some pause that it is a place that is not public. And just because of the fee that is required. And public art to me means public, not pay to see. So I personally have, I am not prepared to support the relocation of this today to the New York Historical Society. I would prefer that we debate and vote on tabling the entire proposition to be taken up shortly, not to table it for, you know, generations to follow, and alternatively to remove it and perhaps temporarily put it wherever it can be safely placed in a public location, which may or may not be the governor's room. But we will have to debate that, where it would be relocated to, as again, very, very shortly.
So Signe, are you saying they could remove it and store it somewhere? Well,
we haven't gotten that far, which is why I think Merrill's proposition, because I think while I don't think any commissioner doubts or questions that the statue needs to be removed from the city council chambers. And I think that has been extremely eloquently presented. And I believe that we are all in agreement that that is the case. the challenge is, it is a piece of public art. It is under our jurisdiction, and we need to be thoughtful about where it might go. This is undoubtedly not the last piece of public art that will, as the gentleman said before, Christopher Columbus and what have you. I mean, these are all to be dealt with seriously, with consideration and thought. And so I guess that's where we find ourselves right now. And I guess I will, I don't know how many commissioners we still have, but there is obviously some emotional urgency here. And I think that we should vote. So I'm going to.
Sydney, just one quick thing for that motion to table. Could we vote on that, but put in the way it was phrased with a time frame that is that we can attain a time frame that is relatively rapid for us to begin to deal with the other possibilities. But if we then say, if we say with this, we're saying not just table, are we saying that we do advocate its removal from the city council chamber, but that we need more time or tabling on the next steps? Is that what it's about? That we're willing to say that we agree on the reason that it should be removed, but we don't yet know how and when? Is that part of it? And
I think that as I understand these votes, we can contribute our own personal additives, if you will, to that vote. So if somebody wants to table with a motion that it be acted upon within the next 2 months, that's fine. Someone else can table it with a motion that we need more full public discourse, whatever it is, that I believe can be contributed to the basic vote on whether to table the action.
Signe, I think
Am
Meryl.
I correct, Carrie?
Yeah, sorry. I know Meryl wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Are you there? Okay.
I would like to just add one more thing. I want to say that what Signe said really resonates with me. When you're going to deal with a public piece of art that is owned by the public, it is important to allow access, opportunity, and educational components to be part of this. You know, I think by tabling it, I was thinking along those lines, but I was thinking, you know, the public library has a copy of the Declaration of Independence. It is an educational institution. The public library is represented on this commission. I think rather than put it in storage in the Historical Society, let's display it at the public library near the Declaration of Independence, where educational programs come and go for teenagers and children and young adults in continuing education programs. And let's have at it. But let's just not erase it, store it, or put it in a place where it will never get discussed and debated. After today's testimony, I would simply say the articulation of the passion on this subject merits educational competencies and further discussion.
So we can have
well
that.
Said, Meryl.
It's terrific. So then we table it in the way that Meryl described, and then we proceed to follow up in the way that she has just articulated.
I'm just going to allow the council members to say, Councilmember Miller. Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you. Let me just say that I think what you heard passionately articulated from the members of council is this is where we assemble to do the people's work. But it's also a place that we are reminded of evidence of privilege continuing to be perpetuated here, that there's no education going on, there's no public discourse about Jefferson when we show up to hold hearings, to create public policy. This would not be the proper forum. Let me also say that, as was expressed very early on, the notion of the removal first took place in 2001. We sent letters to the other side of our co-legislative body, which is the administration, in 2019 and 2020 with the Speaker of the Council. It is without equivocation that the authority of what lies and it is exhibited in the council chambers belong to the members of the council, and with all due respect, and not this outside body. The people will not, and this body, and I know that my colleague mentioned what the council will look like and come January 1. But as it is presently constituted, 26 of the 51 members are folk of color. And I don't see how we move forward with the people's business, knowing that we have allowed outside interference in that chambers to do what we all know to be the correct thing. This is not going under the radar. This has not been like transparency. This is a conversation that has been a part of public discourse for over 20 years now. And thus for us to put it off.
I do want to say, sir, that
for us to put it off anytime for another day, it would be just unacceptable.
Yeah. I mean, I understand.
We all have jobs to do. And deferring it, kicking the can down the road is not acceptable.
Sir, I understand that you've what you're saying, but I do want to state for the record that the Public Design Commission just received this proposal, and we do have a public process that we are going through. So I just want to state that. I mean, I understand what you're saying, though, in terms of your own history with it.
So let me just say once again, and whether we debate the merits or not, whether or not that this is within the purview and the authority of the Design Commission to do so, we're just simply saying that that statue can no longer exist in those chambers. Its time has just come. And it's come, and for this can to get kicked down the road or become a matter of the commission when we've had this discussion for the past 4 years.
I think we agree.
For it to happen now, that seems to be, merely a way to kick the can down the road or to not do it, right? So it is time for it to get done. And if in fact it becomes the responsibility of the commission and it is on the calendar to be voted on, then we should vote.
I move that we vote. Can we vote?
We have all.
Councilmember Barron has something to say.
I just want to say this. It is grossly irresponsible to not at least do what you said everybody agrees with, remove it from City Hall. Now, if you want to delay to talk about what should happen to it after that, fine, but remove it from City Hall when you said everybody's in agreement. And by the way, you don't need a statue to discuss Thomas Jefferson's history. Statues are for people of honor. You don't need a statue for that. So when I said I didn't want to go to the Historical Society and some of my colleagues wanted to go there, I don't think it should go anywhere. I don't think it should exist. Don't have to agree with me on that. I think it should be put into storage somewhere, destroyed or whatever, because he's that bad. But even if you don't agree with that, everybody agrees today that it has to go from City Hall.
I'm not sure that was what Signe said.
Well, she said
I think we should listen to hear from the commissioners.
She can speak for herself. She said that we all agree that it should not be there. That's what she said. Now,
in the council chamber.
If she wants to change her mind and say, I didn't mean that because you're putting pressure on the fine. But bottom line is she said it. And
I'm not putting pressure on anybody. I thought she meant, okay.
Even if she didn't say it, that's irrelevant. Even if she didn't say it, that it'll be irresponsible when this city is talking about being more conscious of the insults to our community when massive demonstrations have occurred by the public. And for some of you to say we need more educating on it, if you don't know about Thomas Jefferson by now, I don't know how much longer it will take you to learn, but it would be irresponsible not to at least vote to remove it. And then we can debate what happens to it after that.
You are correct. That is what I said. I am not going back on my words. What I am saying, however, is that as the body that has jurisdiction over this public art, we need to consider where this piece or any other piece, and there are 700 pieces of art under our jurisdiction. We cannot make a rash decision that will set a precedent for the other 699 pieces of artwork that also may have challenges from other people and other groups of people. So that is where the tabling comes. Now, I absolutely hear you and believe that we are not going to kick this can down the road, that we need to set for ourselves a very short leash on time when we consider where this piece is going to get relocated to. A recommendation was made to another institution. We haven't spoken to that institution. We can't just vote today and say, sure, let's just move it to the New York Public Library. There is a process there. And all we're saying is we're a body that has a process. And while this piece is highest on your mind today, and has been obviously for a period of time, there are many other pieces of artwork for which we are responsible. And we need to be considerate of that process. So I think Councilperson Miller has his hand up. Do you want to acknowledge?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I just want to say that the council has actually done its due diligence for months now and have spoken to so many institutions. And the one institution that was actually willing to take the statue was the Historical Society. So I don't want us to be redundant and reinvent the wheel and you guys go back and try to find someone that's going to take it when that work has actually been done by the council here. We haven't been just sitting on our hands and just trying to figure it out, whether it was through, Department of Citywide Administrative Services and what their responsibilities was and what the responsibilities of the members of the council were. But in terms of how do we facilitate this, we've been working diligently for quite a while with a lot of different organizations and bodies to see if we can have this removed. And so to go out and say that we can arbitrarily reach out to the library, which may or may not be a good idea, but just about if you pull up a list, we probably have exhausted that list and they have said an unequivocal no, that they were not willing to receive. And so that would just prolong the process as well. So I just want you to keep that in mind, and also the fact that the alternate decision I submit belongs with the council on whether or not we want this statue to be in the chambers. What happens to it after that?
I'm not sure what we're doing here then. If you have the authority to remove the statue, then why is it before us? You're muted, sir. But
because the process of removal was where you guys came in.
Can we vote on Signy's on the motion if others agree in the way you phrased it or appropriately?
So the motion before us, in order to be as expeditious as possible, the motion before us is that we acknowledge that the piece needs to be removed from the City Council chamber. We as a commission will act before the end of 2021 in finding an appropriate location where it remains in the public realm. That is the motion before us. If somebody would like to add on to that or vote against that, of course, that is your choice. I will start in alphabetical order. So we are, honestly, I've sort of lost my notes on where we are here. I believe we are on a roll call on item 27899. As I said, you can vote for or against the motion that was just put forth, and you can add on to it as you see fit. Bill Ahrens.
I vote yay.
Karen Keel.
Approve.
Deborah Martin.
I approve with the commitment that it must be removed before year end, before the new council members are impaneled.
Manuel Miranda.
I approve the motion. I also approve the motion as originally presented for transfer to the next.
Susan.
I approve it as it's originally proposed as well.
Okay. Susan Morgenthau.
Susan,
you're
you're
muted.
You're muted.
Approve.
Ethel Sheffer.
Approve.
Merrill Tisch.
Oh, God. Approve.
Mary has departed. Is that true? And myself, yes. So we thank you very, very much for all of you who spoke today, for the passions that you have conveyed. And we are committed to acting before the next council people and yourselves, hopefully, re-enter the chambers in the new year. Thank you. So we still have a few projects to go here.
What?
Sorry.
Yes.
What's the negative of doing that on our next call? I mean, it's the time when we were going to finish.
Yeah.
I
think we played out a little bit.
Yeah.
So we can.
We have two more pieces of
two artworks, very non-controversial artworks, I think.
But maybe not with a time frame.
But
yeah. We could do it next month in 4 weeks.
Maybe we can call a special committee meeting. Grace,
right. Right.
Can we talk to the agencies about that?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, they're both. Let's see. So we have the Eduardo Coimbra artwork at the Bronx Animal Care Center. That's on for conceptual, and it's been well received. And then we have The Feeling is Mutual by Justin Valdez, which has also been well received with some minor commissioner comments. So we can work with the team to maybe organize a committee meeting or something. Great. So that they don't have to wait for a whole month.
Okay, so let's adjourn now. But Signe, may I ask just for you and other staff to consider just how you want to do this, that there might be some consultation with a few people on the commission or the staff in whatever way you determine of how to proceed, given that you set some time frame, informally of how we want to follow up on the motion.
Well, clearly.
Yeah, obviously. I'm just saying that leave it to
Ethel,
you.
Ethel will follow up. Ethel will follow up. But I think
we need to try
to adjourn the public meeting first, and then we'll follow up with you. Okay?
Fine, thank you.
We're going to vote on we're not going to have the two artworks presented, and we'll work on a committee meeting with that and also try to help those projects advance given this delay and this very important discussion. So Signy, I think you can call the meeting as adjourned unless